What happened during the Void Century? The discovery of a colossal iron giant in Mary Geoise, whose date of manufacture dated to 900 years ago, proves the existence of an ancient kingdom that was technologically advanced, but that kingdom was specifically located in none other place than Mary Geoise itself, in what before that city was once called the Country of God, the settlement of the Lunaria. This missing puzzle piece explains everything about the Void Century and what happened in it when Joy Boy fought with the Lunaria of the God Country as the Sun God against the Devil of the Moon, and how the Lunaria brought their advanced technology from the Moon civilization to create an incredibly advanced civilization in the God Country, even going on to develop the very first Devil fruits on the tree stretching all the way from the bottom of the red line all the way to the top, the Sun Tree Eve, the tree of the Sun God. This is what actually happened during the Void Century. Over 200 years ago, researchers once located a legendary iron giant that attacked Mary Geoise. Its manufacture date meets the time of 900 years ago when a certain immense kingdom existed, being the kingdom of Joy Boy's people. Really though, the far more important question is why exactly this giant robot would be found in Mary Geoise of all places. After all, it is a robot, so it's not something it did of its own will, but rather something that it was programmed to do, especially with the precedents we've seen in the One Piece world, such as how Kuma was programmed to protect the Thousand Sunny for 2 years. This means that the robot was programmed to attack Mary Geoise way prior to its reawakening 200 years ago, but if it was made 900 years ago, then things just don't add up, because back then Mary Geoise did not yet exist. After all, this city was founded 800 years ago as the Void Century ended, meaning that the robot was not programmed to attack Mary Geoise, but rather what existed there at the top of the red line before it. And we know that this robot also pertained to Joy Boy's faction, the Immense Kingdom, as told to us both by Vegapunk that it pertained to the kingdom and by the fact that it seemed to carry a giant spear that looks awfully suspicious like the one that the Sun God Nika holds in its depictions, which only fuels more the idea that this was an ancient version of the General Frankie, or rather the Vega Force, as Vegapunk put it, used to fight for Joy Boy's people. We can also see in the depiction of when it attacked Mary Geoise 200 years ago that the robot already had battle damage previously, such as missing a horn or having a katana lodged on its chest, meaning that it already entered a battle long ago prior to these events at Mary Geoise, so it is likely that 900 years ago it was defeated in Mary Geoise and fell in battle right there. During that time, it's possible that the robot either remained hidden underground somewhere beneath Mary Geoise, or more likely outright fell off the red line altogether as it was defeated and sunk into the sea, which would explain why it is covered in moss and how it managed to remain hidden all this time. After all, we saw how the Vega Force could move through water and air, so maybe 200 years ago, something reactivated its circuits underwater, and it climbed back up the red line all the way to the top as Frankie suggested. At that point, it followed its programming again to attack the top of the red line, to then launch an assault on what was now Mary Geoise. However, its lack of the very little energy it had left, with no one to power it, meant that it deactivated pretty quickly, causing it to collapse right then and there, before it could cause any real damage to the city or its people. But then, what was in place of Mary Geoise at the top of the red line before the city was founded that this robot might have wanted to attack? Well, we already know. We've been told exactly what lied up there by Whitebeard. Before Mary Geoise, on top of the red line, there existed a settlement known as the God Country. This was said to be where the tribe known as the Lunaria once lived. The Lunaria, of course, were incredibly powerful beings, being tall, imposing figures with dark skins that were incredibly durable, wings that allowed them to fly freely unlike other winged folk, and fur on their backs that would burn forever. Now, the question here, as Vegapunk posed, is what was the robot's purpose? I think ultimately it can be boiled to one of two. Either one, it was set to attack at the top of the red line because it was ordered to do so, or two, it tried to defend the top of the red line by chasing away the intruders who were not part of its people, whom we detected as enemies. So which one is the case? Well, if we go by the first theory, attacking the country, then that would mean that the Lunaria were the enemies of Joy Boy. But that doesn't quite make sense, because King mentioned that the Lunaria were waiting for the new Joy Boy to arrive, so clearly the two were allies. In other words, it would mean that the second theory is likely what actually happened, that the robot was there to protect the top of the red line from their enemies, and seeing humans at the top, it tried to drive them away with its spear to drive them off its homeland. This is actually very similar in how the iron giants of Elijah Island used their strength to drive away any intruders trying to steal the Todd Musica music sheet, which were no doubt also provided by the people of the kingdom who made this iron giant. But then, do you realize what this means? Do you realize the massive implications of this? It means that the God Country was where this robot originated from, or in other words, that means the God Country is the ancient kingdom. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the God Country was the entirety of the ancient kingdom. After all, as Clover explained, the kingdom was massive in size, which likely referred to the fact that it had allies, or in simpler terms, nakama, all around the world, such as the Shandians, the Sea Folk, or the Minks, among others, were all considered part of people of this country. So the Lunaria could also be counted among those allies, since after all, they too were an oppressed race, much like the aforementioned, that were persecuted by humans. After all, it is quite possible that Joy Boy was a human, but no doubt the God Country served as a key location for the immense kingdom, and once you start thinking about it, you might realize how this has made perfect sense all along. I mean, after all, this ancient kingdom possessed incredibly advanced technology way ahead of its time, but where did this technology originate from? As we saw in Annel's cover story, the moon. And the Lunaria are people from the moon, as not only do they have wings, but it's even in the name, as Luna is Latin for moon. So quite simply, the Lunaria, the moon people, could be the ones that brought this technology to the God Country that allowed Joy Boy's people to be so advanced. This would also explain what Vegapunk mentioned about how these inventions require a particular full force he was trying to replicate, being fire. If Vegapunk could only have an eternal flame that never went out, that could quite literally make a sun that would power all of this technology, what are the creatures that are perennially burning with flames on their backs? The Lunaria, who with their flames could power all of this technology for the kingdom. Even the Iron Giant could be powered if the person staying inside it, just like the General Frankie, powered it with its flame. This would explain why Vegapunk stated that the 900-year-old giant found in Mary Geoise 200 years ago helped prove the theory that the ancient kingdom existed, because they were likely one and the same. This would explain why the Lunaria have white hair, just like Nika. This would explain why when Oda drew a young king in an SBS, he drew him with a spear, just like Nika. This would explain why Whitebeard knew about the God Country's existence, since Roger did tell him about the people of this ancient kingdom. And this would explain above all else why it was called the God Country, because its king, the king of this kingdom, was Joy Boy, or the Sun God Nika, and the ancient kingdom, the country of this god, and the other Lunaria who were also called gods. And this could explain why the massive tree that stretches from its roots at Fishman Island all the way up across the Red Line to supposedly the top where the God Country once was, is called the Sun Tree Eve. And according to the story of Genesis from the Bible, Eve was the one who was tempted by the devil to eat the devil fruits from the forbidden tree. So if the ancient kingdom with its advanced technology was able to create the very first devil fruits through the application of the bloodline element / lineage factor, in the same way that Vegapunk has been able to apply that technology to replicate fruits now, then it makes sense that those devil fruits were originally developed in the God Country where the ancient kingdom existed, being made to grow where else but on the Sun Tree Eve. Could this mythical tree venerated by its people also be reflected in their culture, which is why King's real name is Albert, which translates to tree? All of this could finally help us understand how the 20 human kingdoms that allied together came into conflict against Joy Boy, explaining, just as Vegapunk put it, how the Void Century is a history of war between this country and 20 human kingdoms. As we know, the allied powers won and defeated the God Country, replacing its people, who were known as gods, and taking their place as the world government. This could explain why the government is so keen on persecuting the Lunaria, even more than any other species. I mean, like, they're offering 100 million belly to anyone who would even tip them about the existence of a Lunaria. To put it into perspective, that's a massive amount of money, the same amount that could buy you a devil fruit or a large bounty, so the government is clearly very interested in the erasure of the Lunaria. They eliminated the immense kingdom that they fear so much, wiping away their ideals from history so that their dreams and ideals would be forgotten, and then seized the God Country for themselves, building Mary Geoise in its place and becoming the new gods of the world, essentially seizing the spoils of victory and replacing the Lunaria. And, hear me out, could this be the reason why Mary Geoise is pronounced the same as joie, which translates to joy, whereas the word Mary comes from Latin sea? Either way, the Lunaria stopped being called gods, and instead now, the gods were the celestial dragons, naming themselves as such after the dragons that they venerated, believing to be the new gods of the world. As such, the descendants of the immense kingdom, who came to be known as the D clan, the faithful people of the dawn, became now known by a different name: the divine enemies of the gods. As Rocinante put it, in this case the gods would be the celestial dragons, meaning that the people of the D opposed the celestial dragons, the new gods, with the real motive being intending to destroy the world. But as Rocinante clarifies, this is not a destruction meant in a negative sense, like the one that a tyrant would bring. Rather, it is a destruction that is meant to change the world for the better. And what a lot of people agree is that the destruction is very much literal, as it would involve physically destroying the Red Line and the Grand Line to unify the world into one sea, the All Blue. Through the firepower of Pluton, Poseidon's ability to command the Sea Kings in the Calm Belts, and whatever power Uranus might have, these would be able to come together to unbind these walls from the world. The Lunaria and the Fishmen were both going to lose their homes, as their home islands would be destroyed in the destruction of the Red Line, but as we've seen from the resolve of the Sea Folk, they were ready to emigrate to the surface to go live together with all other races and leave their islands behind. And that is exactly why both Odin and Yamato said that Momonosuke would be one of those who could bring the dawn of the world, because once he uses Zunisha to bust open the borders of the Wano country and unleash the ancient ship Pluton, this can then be used to finally destroy the Red Line. This might also be the reason why Zunisha claimed to have committed a grave crime 800 years ago at the climax of the Battle of the Void Century, as it perhaps was too afraid to unleash an ancient weapon on the world and hesitated to play its role, disobeying the orders of the Momonosuke of the time that commanded it, resulting in a critical loss for the people of the ancient kingdom that might have played into their downfall. Thankfully, however, faced with this loss, the Kosuke clan, allies of the ancient kingdom from the Wano country in possession of Pluton, made a contingency plan to preserve the ideals of their people, which is what led to the creation of the poneglyphs. Though the government emerged victorious, the allies of the kingdom went into hiding, erecting walls and closing off their countries while developing warrior-like cultures to ensure that they could safekeep the poneglyphs until the day that a new Joy Boy would come. On the day of promise, a new Joy Boy would emerge, liberate the world, and bring it freedom through laughter to all through the One Piece. However, in the context of all this, are we not forgetting a key pivotal figure, the opposing figure of the Sun God and arguably its greatest foe and rival, the Devil? The Devil King was a mythical figure of ancient times, the complete opposite to the Sun God. The two are complete opposites in many ways, but what is perhaps the most interesting element of all is the fact that the Devil has Lunaria wings. Now, this is no small matter. These are definitely jet black Lunaria wings, something even Oda pointed out in his notes, so that undoubtedly links the Devil with the people of the God Country. But that could perhaps explain a lot of things. What if the Devil was a traitor among the people of the God Country? After all, the myth says that the Devil fruits originated as incarnations of the Devil King. Now, it's been put into question if that myth really is true, and it's also possible they were created with actual science from the Bloodline elements as Vegapunk discovered, but regardless, scientific or not, they should have a connection with the Devil. Similarly, the Book of Genesis states that the Devil once tempted humans to eat the Devil fruits, so if the Devil originated in the God Country, then maybe it was one among Joy Boy's faction who invented and created the Devil fruits, but perhaps also potentially used those fruits for personal gain and, as it was stated by some characters, to seek the destruction of the world, though in a bad sense now, with its schemes maybe even playing a part into why the ancient kingdom fell from this betrayal. This would explain why, despite most members of the D-Clan seeking to bring the dawn of the world, some of them are trying to achieve the complete opposite, with Rox D. Shebek and Marshall D. Teach instead striving to rule and destroy the world rather than bring its liberation. While there are those in the D-Clan who have inherited the will of the God of the Sun, there are also those who have inherited the will of the Devil from the Moon, the fallen Lunaria who betrayed its tribe through the Devil fruits, and seek to fulfill its ideals once more. Long ago, there was a large conflict between Joy Boy and its people of the God Country, who seek to unite the world and connect it together, and 20 human kingdoms who hated such ideals of progression that would make them lose the power they so tightly clung to. During that time, the Sun God Nika had to clash with the Devil King in battle after the latter's betrayal. The Devil King was eventually defeated and sealed within the music sheet taught Musica to rest for the future to be reawakened again someday, while Joy Boy's people were so weakened that the 20 human kingdoms wiped them out and took their place in the God Country. However, as it was long foretold, one day another Joy Boy, a new Sun God, will eventually arise. He has already started to, and similarly it is also possible that another Devil King will arise to oppose him, with these two forces, these two opposing wills, clashing in a crossroads of fate to settle the future of the new era, the Shinjidai. Like the swell of an unfaltering storm, the new era of the great will no doubt come. Now no one can stop it anymore.